Hi, everyone, and welcome to Appalachian Traditions, a virtual conversation of craft, music, and dance. I'm Darcy Holdorf. I'm the program director here at the John C. Campbell Folk School, and I'd like to welcome you. Thank you for joining us today. Today we are thrilled to be presenting a presentation from Ann Woodford, who is a folk school friend and a neighbor, and she's got lots of wonderful things to share with you today. Before we go into the presentation, I'd just like to give you a note on how this Zoom program will work. This is webinar mode, so you attendees will not have video or audio capabilities, but you can use the chat. So if you'd like to say hello to Ann and go ahead and tell us where you're joining from in the chat, you can go ahead and do that now. You can also put questions in the chat. Tammy Godfrey is with us, and she'll be saying hello and monitoring the chat and answering your questions. There's also a Q&A function. So if you click on Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can put questions in the Q&A too. So we will have about a 45-minute presentation from Ann, and then we'll do a 10 to 15-minute Q&A at the end. So if you have questions and you want to ask Ann some things, feel free to do that. And I'd just like to let you all know that we here at the Folk School are getting ready for reopening. We are scheduled to open in May, and we have a lot of changes to our programming due to COVID, a lot of safety guidelines that we've recently put on our website. So if you have questions about coming to the Folk School, taking classes, teaching classes, or just visiting, you can take a look at our website, and Tammy will also share the guidelines in the chat so that you can kind of know what's going on, and we hope to see you this spring or summer. So, okay, let me tell you a little bit about Ann. So Ann Woodford is an award-winning activist, author, and artist. She's an Andrews, North Carolina native, so she's just down the road from us. She wrote this incredible book, When All God's Children Get Together, which is, as you can see, an incredible resource. It's really one of the main resources for Black history and stories and even photographs from the western part of west of Buncombe County. She's also the founder of One Dozen Who Care, which is an incredible organization that empowers, educates, and encourages economic development for women, for youth, and for elders in Western North Carolina. And Ann's message is really all about bridging cultures, bringing people together, and that's what she does through her Multicultural Women's Conference, which is an annual conference, and it's been going for 20 years, I believe. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful resource here in Western North Carolina. So today she's going to present Making the Invisible Visible, African American History and Heritage in Far Western North Carolina. And so she'll be speaking about issues, institutions, and practices that have impacted African Americans in the 1950s and 1960s, as well as telling some personal stories. And I'm so happy to have you, Ann. I do want to read one thing, a foreword from Ann's book. So let me just grab that just to give you kind of an idea. I really recommend, if you're researching or if you'd just like to know more about the history here, I highly recommend her book, and we will share a link where you can purchase it. So just a tiny thing from her foreword. All God's Children reminds us yet again that the Appalachian South is far richer and more diverse in terms of its racial and ethnic heritage. The stories, memories, testimonials, and interviews captured here offer a historic mosaic that adds much to our knowledge and appreciation of Black life in the Mountain South. It's a story of oppression, of hardship, and of neglect and abuse by the predominant white culture that overshadowed it for so long. But it is also a story of triumph over those challenges, with community bonds and spirit providing the most vital forms of defense and defiance. Through mutual support and cooperation and vibrant institutional and cultural outlets, and through a rich oral tradition that has kept that history and culture alive and meaningful to so many today. And I really do think that's what you do, Ann. You bring
Thank
these
you.
sort of community, bring the community together. And so
Thank you.
thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for reading that information. And I'd just like to say good afternoon to everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you. And there's a painting of a person hanging on the wall that I saw your name. So it's beautiful. I'm so glad. The painting that I did on the wall is Melody. So hi, Melody. Thank you very much, Darcy and Tammy. I really appreciate that you're here. And thank you. I appreciate the folk school. I worked there quite a few years ago. And Phil Maddox, I saw him on. He was my supervisor. And so I just want to say thank everybody for being here. Slides, please. This is the slide of the mountains. I took this slide one day. If we look at that beautiful rainbow, it just gives me hope. And I pray that it gives everybody else hope that we will work together, that we will try our best in every way to tear down the walls that divide us, all kinds of walls, and build bridges. And the way we'll build bridges will be to reach across and have conversations with people. We need to do that. Next slide, please. Always say thanks. I want to say thank you to the people who have made a difference in my life and in the life of one dozen who care. This one that is the second one from the left on the top is David Brose. And David wrote the introductory section of All God's Children that's called An Introduction to Sacred Music in Far Western North Carolina. And he'll be really missed. He passed away not too long ago, but he was very instrumental in working with us at the very beginning of One Dozen Who Care when we had our first event, which was called When All God's Children Get Together. So you'll see down in the lower right corner, 5 of the founding members. And you should recognize, for those who are in this region, you might recognize Brenda Blunt down in the front with me. And on the upper, on the right, in the upper area is Jean Bush, who had a beauty shop in Murphy for many years. In the middle is our president still right now. She's the president of One Dozen, and she lives in Texas, but boy, is she a good person to have as president and support for our organization. And Betty Dorsey lives over in Hayesville. So you can see the people and you see the names there. So I won't go through that anymore, but just want to say thank you to these people that you see the faces right here. Except I will say Rob Bell of the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area was very supportive in helping us get a grant that allowed me to do the research and travel around the communities of far Western North Carolina. So thanks, Rob. I don't think he's with Blue Ridge National Heritage anymore, area anymore. Next slide, please. Again, these are the visionaries that started One Dozen Who Care, and I've already introduced them to you. We met 22 Black women gathered in Murphy and decided that we would like to work together. Because when I came back from California, I'd lived out there for a long time, 9 years. I saw each individual woman doing all she could to make a difference in the community, but she was doing it alone, and maybe people would help her sometimes, but I said we could pull ourselves together and work and gather some funds and do what we need to do to really help our community. So 22 came together because Brenda Blunt and Jean Bennett called on the women in Murphy and Hayesville. And when we decided that we would do this, I wrote a grant application to the North Carolina Humanities Council and received $1,200. So I said, ladies, if each one of us, 22 people, could bring $100 to the table, we could have something to start with, because we would match the monies that we got from the Humanities Council. Well, the next meeting, people who put their money where their mouth was met together with us, and 11 women laid down a check, and one of the ladies laid down $100 bill. She had 3 kids in school. She worked 6 jobs, basically 5 days a week. She was working domestic work, and every 5 days she was working at McDonald's. So she laid that $100 bill down, and we said, we are 1 dozen women right now here together. We are 1 dozen who care. And so we became incorporated. We're a nonprofit by the federal government organization, a community development organization. Next, please. This just shows the programs of 1 dozen who care. And down on the far right, just shows some faces of some of the ladies who have been a part of the women's conference over the years. Many times, many people have come year after year. And we actually had our first event in 2000. And we've missed a couple of years. So just thinking about that, 20 years of working together to build these bridges. People from all different races and religions and all have come to us through the Women's Conference. We have a book collection that is taking place is held at the Andrews Library. And it's called the Pure Miller African American Book Collection. And our dad could not read and write well, but he was brilliant. And so I'm so pleased that he can we go back a little bit? Yeah, here we are. You can see the book club down in the lower left corner. And then we have taken children and young people 10 years old and up into an organization we call 10-10-10, which was a program, 10 kids, 10 projects in 10 months. We trained people on computers in our office here in Andrews. And every year until this pandemic came through, we had an elder dinner that honored an older Black person who was doing work in the community, but not getting any credit or any notice for it. And they didn't ask for it, but we wanted to give them the honor. And also we give the community treasures. So it doesn't matter who happens to be out here in the community working and helping and supporting the work we do. Down at the bottom in the middle, you'll see a white-haired lady. That is Elizabeth Hay. She received one of our awards. And Judy Brooks, that lots of people know, received one of our awards. So next, please, next slide. So 1 Dozen is very active. This painting I did, it's called He, and it says, see me. And what that is, you'll see billboards. There was one in Murphy, a digital one in Murphy, and a static one in Andrews. There will be 5 months of this same billboard in Asheville around the time when there will be an art exhibit that will show many of my artworks. See me is talking about looking at a person. Don't look at just their color, or don't judge them by their religion or any of that, but look at the person and talk to them. Have a conversation with people. And so you'll see hashtag See Me WNC, and that will carry you or take you to pages, including my website, but it's going to be for ABIPA in Asheville and for the IRL, which is the Interdisciplinary Research Leaders, where we're trying to work together to help the health of people of color in far western North Carolina. Next, please. When I wrote the book, I didn't realize that there were any African American people in Graham County. So you'll see that kind of blurred out or grayed out on the map. But this map covers our region. And if you are interested, you can find out what the percentages are. There's only 1.6% African Americans in Cherokee County, and even less if you go by this or other organization that gave some numbers. So you have to think of why people can call us invisible, and why I say we're not invisible. We're here. We help build this community, and it excites me that I had an opportunity to write a book about many of the people who have been here and gone, but they will never be forgotten because their names are written down. So I thank the people who helped me with that, and I could start naming people, but our time is very limited here today. But you can just see this map. And I found later, my teacher over at Tri-County Community College, KT, said, wait, there's a story about a Black man that lived a long time in Graham County, and his name was Trixie or Trix, and he worked at the Topoco Lodge. So I have a story about him, but I won't tell that right now. Let's move to the next slide, please. Our people, African American people, have basically started here um, as slaves, and enslaved people were treated, well, I'll put it this way. It's not any, no one can say that they were a good slave owner, because they owned people, they took their work for free, and they built their wealth on top of the backs of people who were enslaved. And so in Murphy, there was a woman, there were two of these women. One, Aunt Dove Fane, was sold by her owner to his daughter for $1. And the deed was in the Register of Deeds office, but when I went to see it, I wanted to make a copy of it. And I do have a copy, thank goodness. Somebody else gave me a copy of the, the actual deed. Someone had taken it out of the book, and so you can't see the original one there. The story of Aunt Hill Matilda Thomas, was information was given to me by David Dale Dickey, who lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. And he told about the fact that he came to visit in the summers with his family, and that Aunt Hill seemed like just a member of the family. She lived through 3 generations of the Dickey family. And when freedom came, the younger ones took her, according to oral history, took her up to Texana and left her there because the older people of the family had passed away. Well, I could not find anyone who had any record of Aunt Till, and I could not find her name in my research. So that's heartbreaking to me. But David thought she was a most wonderful person and said she didn't take any mess off of anybody. So let's move to the next one. Texana is a community up on about a mile outside of Murphy, and it's called the Black community. Although nowadays Black people can live almost anywhere in this this region without being hassled or harassed as it had been down in Georgia when my grandfather lived down there. So Texana, her name was Texas, and her father named her Texana. I think that's a beautiful name. And the pictures you see here are her father on the left and her mother, her daughter, and her 2 kids on the right. Her name was Marie, and we don't have a picture of Texana. I wish someone would come up with one of those for me. The community was founded by her, and the story is that she built the first house up there, and then afterward other people came and they decided to build a church, and the women of the church hewed the logs and built the first church that was there, and they used it for a school also. Next, please. People are called Black Indians when very often when they're dark skinned, and there's a whole listing of them. Mulattoes would be one, that are mixed people, mixed blood people. And here we have I put the Hemp Hills on this one Black Indian. He was a preacher, and he and his brothers came out here and founded churches, all the Black churches in the Baptist faith out here. There were others before, but they no longer exist. The only faith that only religion denomination that's left here is Baptist in this area, and I mean Clay and Cherokee counties. When you go further out east, closer to Asheville, there are some African Methodist Episcopal churches, and Church of God in Christ, and a non-denominational one over in Franklin. And so a Church of God of Prophecy, forgive me, they're the ones that put together the Fields of the Wood. And so we can look at these Black Indian people, and they made great contributions to our community. I'll move on because time is very short for us. I'm sorry about that. My grandfather was in the ethnic cleansing that took place down in Cumming, Georgia. That's in Forsyth County. And it was a horrible, frightful time. Murders, they burned their churches. The white caps, which were white supremacists, burned down the church, burned down their school, and at gunpoint chased all the people out of Forsyth County. And my grandpa and his mother moved up to Marietta, and he worked for the railroad. So they ended up moving down to Blue Ridge. And at Blue Ridge, whenever a Black man was told to do something in those days, back there in 1912 and before that, since freedom and Reconstruction, they had to do it. There was just no question about it. So he had to ride his wagon. If anybody has the book, they can look at my story about that in the beginning. My introductory words tell the story of being sent to Cherokee County to deliver goods that came in on the train, and how frightened he was traveling through the woods at night to keep from being caught by the whitecaps and possibly injured or murdered. And so I hear in my mind, I can just hear him going as his mules or horses move through carrying that wagon load of goods to come up into Cherokee County. Well, when Grandpa arrived in Cherokee County, he noticed that the people were quite different up here than they were down in Georgia as far as racial problems were concerned. The people were friendlier here and actually talked to him and looked him in his face, and he was stunned. Well, he happened to get bold enough, he said, to ask a white man if there was any property here to sell. And the man said, "Yep, I got a piece up there in Andrews." So he took Grandpa up, and Grandpa bought the property on which he built the first house. And he built that for his mother before he went off to World War I. And that house was standing until a few years ago. I actually lived in it for a little while, even though it was old and run down by that time, but I fixed it up and lived in it for a little while from 1979 to 1982. But Grandpa is the man on the, I call him Grandpa. Grandpa is the man on the right, and his cousin is William Boynes, who was all kinds of things. They call him a jackleg preacher. They called him many names, but he was an entrepreneur who had the only Black business that ever existed in Andrews until Ruth Boone opened her restaurant called Mayakas a few years ago. And unfortunately, Mayakas is not there because it was a beautiful place to go and enjoy a meal. Next slide, please. I probably should have said this before I went, but that's okay. This is fine right here. But William was the one that named the Black community in Andrews, one of the Black communities. He named it Happy Top. And he said that people were out there having a good time in what they call the holler. And he thought it was a wonderful thing. So he named it Happy Top. And now white people all over the area from the edge of town all the way up are glad to know that they live in a place called Happy Top. Well, as I mentioned before, all those people that were chased out of Cumming, Georgia, they were banished and they could not go back to get their property for fear of death. So here's a book, Blood at the Root, and there are others. So we'll move on from here. This next slide, just as an aside, there were people, very superstitious people back in those days, and it ruled the day. Grandpa wore this little dime on his ankle to protect himself from those people who were so evil as to punch out the eyes on a photograph, hoping that it would blind Grandpa and his cousin. Next, please. My life has just been fantastic. I've had a fascinating life, and I hope that I don't run out of time for telling this quick little story. My mother went into labor with me in the winter of, in January of 1947, and Daddy panicked. He didn't have a vehicle of his own at the time, and he ran out down through the neighborhood trying to find somebody to help get her to the clinic, the Rada Van Gorder Clinic, they call it at the time. Well, he couldn't find anybody, but somebody reminded him that Buck Holland, a white man who lived next, right on the edge of the Black community, had a taxi. So Daddy ran to him, and Buck drove that taxi up, but the roads in the Black community hadn't been cleared at all from the snow. And snow was pretty deep in those days. So as he drove up, he packed snow in front of him. And so Daddy yelled out to all the men, "Help, help." And they picked up the taxi and carried it up to the house, got Mama into it, and carried it back down to the road that had been cleared in the white community. And he got her to the hospital in time to have me. So anyway, you see me, a picture of me as a little baby sitting there. You see mama holding me on the left. And the fascinating parts of my life, graduated from high school in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'll say something more about that a little bit later. I became an airline stewardess for American Airlines for a while. And I was an entrepreneur in Columbus, Ohio, with a business that I named after my parents, Purell and Margaret Ann Miller. I called it Pure Land. And down on the far right side is a painting that I did when I was in California. And the lady saw me starting it, and before I could even finish it, she said, "It's mine," and she purchased it from me. And the picture of me sitting there shows the paint one of my paintings that was at the Cherokee County Arts Council down in Murphy at the MAC. And the panels that I created with Pamela Meister and Peter Cook out at the Mountain Heritage Center at Western Carolina University. And it's in a traveling exhibit. So for people who are interested in having it around the area, they can get in touch with Pamela Meister at Western Carolina University's Mountain Heritage Center. She's the director there. Next, please. My work is to make the invisible people in this area visible. It's very important to me that we are known for the work that we have done. And I did forget to say on the other slide, but it's okay, that while I was in California, my sister Nina, that's on the right here, she's been my supporter and just my hero for years, since she was about 4 years old, that I can remember her standing and watching me paint and supporting me and saying how great she thought the work was. And it encouraged me to keep on painting and drawing. But she introduced me to Miss Esther Roll, who was the actress on Good Times on Television. And Miss Roll and I started a company called E&A Global Enterprises. And that was selling dolls that I had created back in Columbus, Ohio, when I started my business called Pure Land Incorporated. We produced those dolls and sold them all over the nation and then internationally through the Army Air Force Exchange Service. And a quickie story on that one is that I had an appointment with the Army Air Force Exchange Service in Indianapolis. Could we go back? In Indianapolis, and confirmed it. And when I drove from Columbus, Ohio down to Indianapolis, there was nobody there to meet me. How heartbreaking that was. They just ignored the fact that I was coming to sell my African American oriented products. And someone said, John Glenn, the senator of Ohio, John Glenn, the astronaut, call him and tell him what happened. That's unfair. So I called, and I've always said, I think I was talking with him. I never know that for sure, but I talked with a man who said, that will not happen. And within 2 weeks, I had a nice order for my African American oriented greeting cards and stationery. And when Esther Roll and I started our business in California, I went back to the Army Air Force Exchange Service and we sold products to them. And the dolls also went all over the world internationally. So this is my sister, Mary Alice, was a great poet. We have a book of hers. She's on the left, beautiful child. She passed away in 1991 and it broke my mother's heart. And my mother never got over it. So my mother developed cancer and passed away in 1993 and left daddy alone here. But it was a great, strong survivor and a wonderful oral historian. And he's the one that gave me a lot of information to keep moving with this book. And of course, there's Grandpa again, right in the middle. Grandpa said, Anne can do anything. And that encouraged me also. So I thank God for this wonderful, supportive family. That's my sister Nina with the little kitty cat. Nina is one that I cherish and I treasure her. And I'm so glad I could do artwork that has her displayed on it. Next, please. Well, I thought I had my phone unplugged, so I hope it won't keep ringing. Sorry about that, everybody. But these are my great, amazing 4 parents. And here on the left is my grandpa, Cleve, and my grandmother. And it's my grandmother's mother and her father are the two pictures over on the right side. Um, Her father was a drover, and there's a place called the Joe Brown Highway in Murphy that goes around Texana, that Black community there. He was a farmer, and he was a drover of horses and turkeys and pigs, and he went down Joe Brown Highway, which was called the Unicoi Parkway. And so this, I have a great legacy in my family, and I'm proud of these people. Next, please. My mother's parents, Big Granny and Little Grandpa. Grandpa was 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 130 most all of his adult life. And Big Granny weighed 450 pounds at one time, and he married her when she was 13. And it's so funny that they say, he was they were the same height when he married her. And she grew up and she got bigger and bigger. And they had three children, three girls, four girls, mama and her three sisters. And we'd go over to their house every summer and spend 2 weeks to a month. And I loved to be on Big Granny. She just put me on her knee and shake, and it was like laying back on a waterbed. I just loved that lady. And Grandpa was a strong little 4 feet 10 inch tall man, and they were just wonderful to give us an opportunity to leave from Andrews and go to Franklin for a little while. Next, please. These are the three Millers who stayed in Andrews after the migration north. All the other family members went to Upper Ohio to work in the car manufacturing places and the steel mills. And so Uncle TD was a farmer like my dad. He's there on the left. And my Aunt Pauline was a well-respected uh, party planner and cook and housekeeper for many of the people in the community, especially the doctors, Dr. Rada and Dr. Van Gorder. And my dad, that was my daddy. On a Father's Day, I took his picture, and he just loved to wear that little white hat. So people would recognize him in it when he got dressed up on a Sunday. Next, please. Um, I make memory of my parents. I'll always think of them and love them so much. They were very strong. Daddy would not let us work because his daddy wouldn't let his daughters work in the field. If we went to the field, we went just loving it because we weren't supposed to do it. You know how kids are. So I looked at these two some time ago, and I just thought about the wonder of these people. Daddy worked all the time. He loved work from the sun came up till after it went down. And Mama sang like an angel. I I love to hear her sing. And I wish we had time for me to sing one of her songs, but we'll wait and see if at the end there's enough time. But Mama passed away, as I said, and left Daddy alone. But he had a story to tell. And I remember him talking her into telling some of the stories from her life before she passed. Next, please. This book came out. It was a lot of hard work, traveling all over the area. And the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area supported One Dozen Who Care in allowing me to go out and write this book. And I did. I wrote the book, but it took a lot of traveling. And even the funds ran out before I could finish almost getting the book completed. And so uh, I had to go on my own. And Daddy went with me sometimes to interview people and to just pick up photographs and try to do what we could to put together this book from his oral history and from my research. And needed someone to lay out the book. And Barbara McRae, who was the editor of the Franklin Press for many years and recently passed away, designed the book and the cover for me. And we moved ahead with that. And she always told me that it helped her when she was going through chemotherapy to get up every day and have a project. And so the beautiful lady was trying to do everything she could to bring people together over in Franklin. And so we can talk a little bit more about that one day. Next, please. As I said, my cousin, Daddy's grandpa's cousin, that was his best friend, William Bowens, who was in the pictures with him back there, had the only business in Andrews, the only Black-owned business in Andrews. Most all of the African-American men in the area worked at the tannery that was owned by the Cover family. And Daddy worked there for both the Covers and the Solomons. And so down here on the left, William Bowen's Pressing Club, he called it, was located where the Methodist Church is located right now. And he said that the the wealthy man who became the mayor of Andrews, Percy B. Farabee, had one suit when he came to Andrews. And he would come in there and give him the suit to press for him or to stitch up. If there were anything to stitch, he'd stitch that up. And he would be in the back room waiting for him to bring his clothes to him, all pressed and ready for him to go to big meetings. Next, please. The work world included, as I said, my Uncle TD as a farmer. Over to the far left is Bud Jones. He worked in the hospital, in the clinic before they moved the Rada Van Gorder Clinic. He worked there and then moved down to District Memorial Hospital and worked there until not too long before he passed away. He was my Aunt Pauline, Daddy's sister's husband. And that's Daddy holding his big African goose that I just loved. Then you will see up in the far right top these two gentlemen that worked at Kelly's Tea Room over in Franklin. They were waiters, and all these people have been well respected in this region. And Daddy's mule is down low next to him. And I'm sorry, old Jake's face is not showing on this slide. Right above old Jake is Christy Bell McKinney, and she was a babysitter and a caretaker for white children and housekeeping in the community. And over to the bottom right is Michael Maldon, who is a mogul, they call him mogul, he in the music industry. He was from Murphy. He lives in Atlanta now, I believe. He may have moved recently to California, but he is a leading entrepreneur and person who has done some wonderful work with people like Beyonce and some other names that I won't start into right now. Next, please. Separate but equal. Our schools were separate, but they certainly weren't equal. Down in the far right is the school that I went to, the same school Daddy went to, and his older siblings and older folks from that, because it was built in approximately 1905. And it acted as a church as well, and the church and the school worked together. The children that you see on the far left with Miss Ida Mae Logan, my favorite teacher, that was the whole student body when they integrated the schools in 1965. When we had to have supplies, we would have to go over to the white school to pick up supplies. And there were two ladies over there that were just marvelous white ladies that I'll never forget. Judy Brooks worked in the office, and they would gather our supplies. And Miss Ardith Hay, the older Miss Hay, worked there and always treated us very respectfully, carefully, and in a loving manner. And at the top up there on the right side is a teacher and her students from back in 1910. Next, please. Education was very important to our people in this community. Helen Jones, shown there on the left, that's her first day of school in 1942, and she still lives in Andrews. And I believe she would be the oldest living Black person in Andrews. At the top up there, you'll see Bill Hyatt. He was my first little boyfriend, and my sister next to me, Mary Alice. They graduated at the same time from Andrews Colored Negro School. They called it Andrews Colored School for 4 years that I was there. And then after that, they called it Andrews Negro School, and it stayed that until 1965 when they integrated. And in the cap and gown is my sister Nina, that went to Allen High School as well. Allen High School was in Asheville. It was a Methodist boarding school. And that's where we had to go if we wanted to get an education, because there was no place to go in Cherokee County at all for me or anyone in Andrews, because if you could go to the 10th grade in Murphy, you had no way to get there. And at the top up there is Sheila Robinson, who graduated from nursing school, and she's come back home to live. and those are her parents and her little, I think he's her little cousin or nephew maybe. So we are proud mountain people, and we will always hold our heads high. Education meant so much to us. Next, please. When we integrated the schools, the reason that it was easier all across Western North Carolina was because of these great sportsmen that we had. Down at the lower left is Keith Jones, who is in the Andrews Hall of Fame, and on the upper right is Leslie McKinney, who has just been inducted or will be inducted on this Friday night at the Andrews football game. Clayton McKinney and Bobby Lewis were also great sportsmen, but it made it easier because they were winners. They believed in winning and they worked hard at it. Many stories, but not enough time. I know I keep saying that, wasting time saying it, right? Next, please. Our churches meant so much to us. And these are the churches that are still existing right now. There are several that have closed down over the years, but the first Black congregations and churches in our region were formed in the late 19th century, in the 1800s, when free Blacks and white people who cared about our faith worked together to build these churches and encouraged us to form the churches and supported us in those. And sometimes white preachers would come and preach if there was not a Black preacher in the area. Next, please. Now, this one is, there's a Bible scripture that talks about the fire of the word of the Lord being shut up in their bones. And if they didn't holler out, didn't speak it out, there would be an issue. So I call this section Women of Fire, because these are the women ministers that we have. All the ones on the left side are living pastors right now of churches or ministers in the churches. And the ones with the red around them, those have passed away. I would like to tell another story. A quick one is that in the red section above, the granddaughter of the preacher that's sitting in the chair contacted me about buying All God's Children book. And she was so excited that she took it to her mother, who's sitting on the arm of the chair and had been very quiet and not talking very much as an elderly person. And she said that it brought her to life. She was so excited to hear her read the stories that I put in the book and to talk about Miss Cecil Sutter was that lady's name. She was a minister that Daddy said held the church together when there were no men around to do it. So that is an exciting story to me. And there are stories about all of these ladies that are here, and I'm proud to know them. Next, please. The veterans. Nina Miller Moses is right there in the middle, and as I said, she's my hero. She's a supporter for me, and she is my hero. I love this lady. Over to the left is Ida Allen Bryson. Ida Allen she was one of the very first WACs when they opened up the Women's Army Corps. She was one of the first ones, and they took in 400 white women, and 10% of that was 40 Black women, and she was one of the 40. She still lives. As far as I know right now, I've tried to get up with her and find her, but I can't find her in the community, but she has not passed away. Our veterans have served our country with distinction. No matter what inequalities, prejudices, and suffering they've gone through. My grandpa said that he went to the service and white women patted him on, hugged him, kissed him, and men patted him on his back and said, "You're going, and when you get back here from World War I, things are going to be different for you. You will have a different life altogether." And he said when he came back, it was as bad, if not worse, even to those who had served our country, that it was very heartbreaking because he came home with optimism, believing what had been told to him before he left. So these gentlemen and these two ladies here are just samples of the people that served our country and in the wars, including World War I on up until now. Next, please. My life is about love. It is about doing everything I can to tear down walls that divide us and to build bridges. And the scripture tells us that out of everything that's around us, no matter what it is, if we can do great things, I won't even go through all that it says. Anybody can read that for themselves. But the greatest of these is love, because love never fails. If you do everything that you can in love, you are going to make a great difference in this world. I thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk, and I'll turn it back to Darcy and Tammy to find questions people might have, and I'll do the best that I can to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. It's this is the great time for anyone to put their questions into the chat or the Q&A. I learn something new every time I hear you present, and it's always so powerful to see those photographs.
Thank you.
So there are some requests to hear you sing, and I have to agree. Would you like to sing something, one of your mom's songs or anything?
I love this song. One day I was sitting in talking to Mama, and I asked her if she would sing a song for me. And this song is about hope, and it's about her faith, and it's the faith that I hold as well, that there will be a brighter day for us and for her especially. So she sat down and she sang a song that said, "There is a land of faithless day, free from all sorrow, pain or care. And they tell me that there's no night over there. It's just over the hill." Oh my goodness. It put chills on me when I heard her sing that song. My mother she sang like an angel. And at church, she would lead songs. And the ladies from Bryson City, sometimes we would have communication, collaborative services with our Waynesville Missionary Baptist Association, or the fifth Sunday meetings. And the beautiful singers from Murphy and Bryson City would come together with us, and I can hear it now. I just wish that I could hear it in person, because it was just fantastic.
So on that note, can you tell us a little bit about the history of music in the African American community in Texana and Andrews or Western North Carolina, and a little bit about it now?
Well, right now, let's go back to the back. I have a recording that was done by a pastor at the Messiah Church in Murphy of the wonderful singing at Texana, that they had no music. There was no piano, organ, guitar, drums, nothing. It was just those beautiful voices. And that was the biggest thing, because no one used a hymn book. They had the words for the hymn book, but people used their own voices to become the instruments. And oh my goodness, I'm sitting here right now with chills, because it was so beautiful. And I do wish that we could get together again now and let people use their voices before they lose them, because at this present time, people are using canned music. I'm not too happy with canned music. I love it as far as if I'm sitting in my home listening to this singing, that's fine. But at church, I want to hear the voices. And after a while, if we keep this up, we will lose the words, we will lose the tunes, because there were two ladies at my church when I was a child who could, well, three ladies really, but Viola and Christy Bell McKinney, Viola Dorsey and Christy Bell McKinney would sing some old songs, very old, that have been forgotten, and we can't even find them because we don't know enough words from them to even look it up and see if we can find it on the internet. But they would sing. And then Miss Anna Robinson, oh my goodness, she sang a high descant, and her sister, Miss Esther Boynes, would lead the song, And then, oh my mother and all of those ladies would tune in, and the men with their baritone and bass voices and tenors. It just thrilled you. And one day, if I live and nothing happens, as Mama used to say, I want to see if I can pull together a group of people to try to sing again like we did back in those days. So in between all of that, we were singing songs with music because there were people who could play piano, and not in our church though. So our voices had to be the instruments in my church for just about all those years.
That's great. I would love to see you bring that back.
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. To see what we can do.
Yeah.
So there are a few people on this call who are not familiar with Andrews or Texana. Can you just kind of give them an idea of its relationship to Murphy and Brasstown?
Yes. Andrews is probably about 25, maybe 25 miles from Brasstown. And it's a very small community of about maybe 1,500 people. And out of that, very, very few African Americans. We used to joke and say there were 50 African Americans in Andrews. Some would be born and then some would pass away. And so I don't know how many are here right now, because when I was checking the census, it didn't tell the truth at all about the numbers of people in Hayesville or Murphy or Andrews. It gave large numbers of people, and it's not true. 1.6% might even be smaller, a larger number than we have in the county. But Murphy is right on the edge of Georgia and Tennessee. Cherokee County is the last county in the state of North Carolina to the west. And Murphy has a larger economy, and it is the county seat of this area. And there is a bridge down there that's named after Roscoe Hall. And it makes us all very proud because he was a wonderful singer, a Black man who was a deacon in his church at Mount Zion in Murphy. And his pastor, Reverend John P. Webb, has been with that church now for over 30 years, I think something like 33 or 34 years. And he travels up all the way from down in Georgia to come up and preach every Sunday at Murphy's Mount Zion. And well, we recently lost our pastor in Andrews, but Elder Uriel Turner, who was a part of the Mount Zion Church in Murphy, is now our pastor in Andrews, and we're very, very pleased to have him. If there's anything specific you want to know about Andrews, other than the fact that there were these two Black communities. One was called Snaketown, and there was a Black woman that lived over there, and her name, I don't remember what her name was. I mean, I never got her name, but they called her Snake. And so she was the one over there. Women were very powerful, Black women. And that's why One Dozen Who Care has really existed and stayed together, because it's a group of women who care about the community. But they named that little area in Andrews, Snaketown, after Snake. And of course, I told you about Happy Top. And my cousin, William Bowens, said he was out in what they called out in the holler, where another man moved in from Cumming, Georgia, that had been chased out of there, named George Bowens, and his wife was the one whose sister would sing so powerfully with the Holy Spirit. And that community out there, that area, was called the Holler, and William Bowens would cook his wieners. I think they called them, I forgot what they called them back in those days. I don't know why I forgot that, but they say he was cooking them out there, and one of them fell on the ground, and a little dog picked it up and started to run with it and dropped it and picked it up again. And so Daddy says he slapped his hands together and said, hot dog, hot dog. So Daddy always said that he named wieners hot dogs. So if there are other questions about the area, I'll try to answer those.
So Lori did ask, she said some of the female preachers and ministers that you showed on that slide have your family's historic name. Are they related to you?
Yes, from Cumming, Georgia. They don't have my name, but my cousin Andrea Purcell, her grandfather was chased out of Cumming, Georgia also. And Grandpa and his mother moved to Marietta and then down to Blue Ridge and then to Andrews. But her family moved to Asheville, and they still live out in Asheville. And she's a pastor of an AME Zion church out in Asheville. Um, can that person name who it is, who the other person was that they were questioning?
Yeah, so you can type that in the chat, Lori, if you wanted a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So Anne, I have a question for you. We, as you know, a lot of people are moving to the area. I think the pandemic has kind of shifted people's priorities. A lot of people are interested in rural areas like Western North Carolina. And here at the Folk School, we are hiring. And when we recruit new instructors and when we've been interviewing with new staff, and we interview people of color, they've asked me, what is it like to live in Murphy as a person of color? So how would you answer that question?
Well, I have two couples that are new friends, closer friends, and that's Renee, and we call him. See, sometimes my mind comes and goes, but they're Johnsons. Ron Johnson is his name, and he has another name that I call him all the time, and boop, his name went out of my mind. But they moved here from New Jersey, and they live out in Culberson. And I have not heard them say that they've had any issues or any problems living here. And they live a long way away from the Black communities, but apparently they're getting along just great. And there's Aquasi and Janelle Ajuman. They live down next to the Tennessee line, and he built his house from scratch. And I don't think they've ever been bothered by any harassment or anything like that. It's been difficult to get some services that they need, and of course they're so far down there now that the internet is tough for them also. So I'm not sure that either one of them would be online today, but if they are, I'm grateful to have them. Patricia Sherrill is an artist who has her artworks in the MAC, and she was teaching before the pandemic. She was teaching art classes down there, and I believe, I'm not sure, but I think she's in an interracial marriage, and so I haven't heard her say that there are any issues or problems. So if I go by those people, I think this is a great place to move to. We have to travel if we have to get our hair done or want to buy makeup to match our skin or anything like that, unless you go to a person who provides that as a little entrepreneurial business. So I think it's a good place to live. For me, it's been wonderful.
So Mary asked, do you have any idea how many Black people are descended from slaves who were held in bondage in Western North Carolina? For example, not descended from those who were subjected to the ethnic cleansing in Georgia.
I do not, accept my grandfather, Christenberry Howell, was a slave on the Hyatt farm. And he moved from here doesn't live in Cherokee County. I mean, the family doesn't live in Cherokee County. He moved to Swain County, or his auntie, according to what I've heard, took him to Swain County after freedom. And he lived out there all those years. And Grandma and Grandpa went from when he came back from World War I, he had built the house, as I mentioned, for his mother. And she fell in love while he was gone and decided to marry a man and move in with him. And so Grandpa went to Bryson City, which was called Charleston at one time. And Grandpa Howell and Grandma Howell had their home burned down twice. But at one time they lived at what's called Governor's Island out there, and then in Charleston. And so I don't know individuals here that live here right now who are descended from any slaves from the Harshaw large group of slaves that the Harshaws owned, and others who owned small numbers of slaves. When we had our first event up at the Walker Inn, One Dozen Who Care had one of its first events, and that was interviewing the elders, the gathering of the elders up there. Patty and Peter Cook own that house now, and behind it is a little cabin that was a slave cottage back there for the Walkers. And they had two locks on the doors, according to the oral history. They locked the people in with no windows into a little house because they were afraid they would run away. But none of those people that I know of are related to me.
Wow. Well, Anne, we're at our time. I want to ask you again, how can people buy your work? Also, from what I understand, they can visit your website, learn about you, book you to speak or to present. Is that right?
That's correct.
So Tammy,
And
can you share that links to for all that information in the chat?
it's my business is called Anne's Tree. And so it's easy, annstree.com. The book is available at the Curiosity Shop in Murphy, and at Dean's Music and Books in Andrews. Right now, those are the two places in Cherokee County where they can find it. And Rob Tiger did have some books at one time, and I'm not sure if he has them now over there in Hayesville.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I look forward to working with you. It's always a pleasure to see you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate you.
for anyone here on the call, if you, we will send a follow-up email with a link to the recording, and this recording will also be on our YouTube page, so you can share it with friends who might be interested. You could watch it again. We will have our next Appalachian Traditions on April 19th, I believe, and Tammy can share the link to register for that. If you would like to know how a British man suddenly became, now lives, really, he lives between both the birthplace and the burial site of Olive Dame Campbell, and is becoming one of the leading experts on Olive Dame and her history and her story. And he also will be teaching a class here all about Olive's songs, all the songs that she, when she was a song catcher, and lots of Appalachian English ballads. So that will be our next presentation. So thank you very much. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. We appreciate your tuning in. We'll be in touch later. Thank you.
Take care.